Jasmine Crockett stood under the sharp studio lights of the Fox News special debate program, her navy pants suit pressed neatly against the backdrop of waving American flags. The first-term Congresswoman from Texas held her microphone firmly as the camera zoomed in on her calm but steady face. Across from her, conservative radio heavyweight Mark Levin leaned forward with aggression, his familiar scowl deepening. For the fourth time in barely 3 minutes, he cut her off mid-sentence. "You don't know what you're talking about." Levin's voice thundered across the studio. "The Constitution isn't some buffet where Democrats can pick and choose." "Mr. Levin, if you would let me finish just once," Crockett tried, her voice steady but controlled. "I'm not finished," Levin barked, stabbing his finger in her direction. "This is exactly the problem with your party. You preach about democracy, but you can't even allow others to talk." The audience stirred as the split screen showed Crockett's expression. She didn't blink. Instead, a faint smile crept across her lips as she reached for a folder that had been untouched beside her during the fiery exchange. The Harvard-trained lawyer and former public defender appeared to decide something in that moment, her eyes meeting Levin's as she carefully opened the folder. "Since you won't let me speak," she said evenly, "perhaps you'll let these documents speak instead." What followed in the next 90 seconds would spread across cable news, social media feeds, and political discussions for months afterward. Mark Levin, the broadcasting titan with millions of loyal listeners, had no clue that his endless interruptions had just built the stage for what many later called the most spectacular collapse of a media figure ever caught on live television. Before we get deeper into this stunning clash, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more political showdowns and commentary that mainstream outlets often ignore. You won't want to miss what happens next in this explosive face-off between a media veteran and a rising congressional voice. Mark Levin had built his career on outrage and forceful conviction. At 66, the former Reagan administration lawyer had reinvented himself as a conservative media powerhouse. His syndicated program, The Mark Levin Show, reached millions every single day. His Fox News show, Life, Liberty and Levin, was a ratings winner week after week. With 9 best-selling books and a reputation among his fans as the Great One, Levin was treated as untouchable in conservative spaces. Famous for his combative style and fiery outbursts, Levin had made a living shouting down critics. His confrontational method had become his trademark, interrupting guests, dismissing opposing views as trash, and launching into passionate monologues about originalism, liberty, and the dangers of progressive politics. For decades, this formula had worked perfectly, securing his place as a conservative kingmaker whose approval was sought by Republican hopefuls across the country. That night, Levin arrived prepared for what he thought would be an easy win against a relatively unknown lawmaker. The subject, congressional oversight and executive authority, was a constitutional matter where Levin believed he reigned supreme. Producers had warned him that Congresswoman Crockett's legal background was impressive, but Levin brushed it off casually. "She's been in Congress for what, 5 minutes? I've studied the Constitution for 40 years. Jasmine Crockett symbolized much of what Levin had opposed for years. At 42, the Democrat from Texas had risen quickly in politics. After earning her law degree from the University of Houston Law Center, she built a name as a strong civil rights attorney and public defender before entering elected office. In 2020, she secured a seat in the Texas House of Representatives. Just 2 years later, she won a place in the U.S. House, representing Texas's 30th district. Unlike many who abandoned their previous expertise once elected, Crockett leaned into her legal skills in Washington. She gained positions on the House Judiciary Committee and the House Oversight Committee, where her precise questioning of witnesses had already gone viral multiple times. Her ability to simplify complicated legal principles for the public made her a growing star on social platforms, with millions of views on clips of her performances. But the battle that night wasn't simply two personalities colliding. The stakes were higher. The debate was triggered by a controversial executive order signed by the president, criticized as overstepping constitutional limits. As a member of the Judiciary Committee, Crockett had been directly involved in analyzing the order. Levin had spent the past week on his radio show blasting the order as the most unconstitutional move in modern presidential history, and mocking Democrats like Crockett as ignorant of constitutional law for defending it. Fox News producers had expected a lively but focused debate between a staunch constitutionalist and a progressive congresswoman with legal training. Instead, what unfolded shocked everyone. From the start of the segment, Levin dominated. He kept speaking over Crockett, barely letting her get a sentence out. Moderator Sean Hannity tried only half-heartedly to balance the exchange, essentially allowing Levin to control the conversation. For the first 10 minutes, Crockett made attempts to respond with facts and legal points. But every time she built momentum, Levin cut her off. What neither Levin nor Hannity grasped was that Crockett wasn't there just with prepared remarks. She had come with evidence. The air in the studio grew tense. Staff members glanced nervously at each other as Levin's interruptions grew more aggressive and Crockett's patience began to wear thin. On screen, the contrast was striking. Levin was red-faced, animated, and loud. Crockett remained composed, though visibly more resolved. Something was about to shift. "Let's return to the constitutional point," Hannity said, trying to reset the atmosphere after Levin's fourth interruption. "Congresswoman Crockett, you have 30 seconds. Before she could even open her mouth, Levin jumped in again. "The issue is that the Congresswoman and her party don't grasp the simple separation of powers created by the founders. If they had ever bothered to study Federalist 47, which I doubt, then..." At that moment Crockett made her move, reaching for the folder that would change the course of the debate. "Mr. Levin," Crockett said, her voice suddenly cutting through his rant with striking authority. "In the 5 minutes we've been live, you've interrupted me 12 times. I've allowed you to speak without a single interruption. Don't you think viewers deserve the same respect from you?" Levin scoffed. Turning toward Hannity, "Sean, this is nonsense. I'm trying to educate the viewers about constitutional law, and she's whining about being interrupted." "I'm not whining," Crockett replied evenly. "I'm pointing to a clear pattern. A pattern that clashes with your claim of valuing fair debate." The studio fell silent. Even Hannity seemed frozen, caught between his friendship with Levin and the glaring imbalance on stage. "You know what?" Levin said, leaning back with a dismissive gesture. "Fine. Let's hear what constitutional brilliance the Congresswoman has to offer." Crockett gave a small nod. "Thank you. As I was saying, the executive order at issue fits within established precedent. The Supreme Court has repeatedly held." "That's completely wrong," Levin broke in, unable to hold himself back. "The court has never upheld this kind of abuse. This is exactly the kind of misleading nonsense." "Mr. Levin," Crockett said more firmly this time, "that was your 13th interruption. I'm beginning to wonder if you're simply afraid to let me finish." The jab hit its mark. Levin's face flushed even redder as he leaned into the mic. "Afraid? I've debated Supreme Court justices and presidential candidates. I don't fear a first-term congresswoman who doesn't even grasp basic constitutional law." "Then why not let me finish one sentence?" Crockett pressed, her tone now carrying a challenge. "If my reasoning is as weak as you say, wouldn't it serve you better to let viewers hear it fully before you attack it?" Sensing the rising heat, Hannity stepped in. "Let's keep this respectful. Congresswoman, continue your point." "Mark, let's allow her to finish before responding." Crockett acknowledged the intervention with a nod. "As I was explaining, the Supreme Court has drawn clear rules for executive authority in cases like Youngstown Sheet and Tube Co. v. Sawyer. Justice Jackson outlined 3 categories of presidential power. This executive order clearly falls under the first, where the president acts with Congress's approval, which the court has consistently found to be constitutional." She paused, waiting for the interruption that felt almost certain. When it didn't come right away, she went on, "Furthermore, in the 2020 case of..." "This is nonsense," Levin burst out, no longer able to hold himself back. "You're completely twisting the Youngstown case. Jackson's concurrence doesn't back your argument in any way. This is exactly what happens when politicians who never actually studied constitutional law start throwing around Supreme Court cases they don't even understand." The camera focused on Crockett's face, which didn't show anger or irritation, but something closer to quiet satisfaction, almost like Levin had walked into a trap she had carefully prepared. "Mr. Levin," she said evenly, "that's interruption number 14. And here's the irony. You've just proven my point about your debate style. But more importantly, you've also made a serious mistake about Justice Jackson's concurrence. I've written entire chapters on the Youngstown case." Levin snapped back, his tone rising. "I don't need a lecture from someone who actually clerked for a federal judge and practiced constitutional law." Crockett cut in, breaking her own rule about not interrupting. "Mr. Levin, with all due respect to your radio background, I've actually argued constitutional cases in federal court. And what you just said about Justice Jackson's concurrence is simply wrong." The studio fell quiet. Even Hannity looked uneasy as the cameras captured the tense moment between them. Levin's face shifted, no longer pure anger, but touched with uncertainty. "That's the problem with constant interruptions, Mr. Levin," Crockett continued, her voice steady but firm. "Sometimes it keeps you from hearing information that could save you from making mistakes on national television." At that point, Crockett opened the folder in front of her and pulled out a single document. The camera zoomed in as she held it up, a page covered in highlighted lines. "This," she said, "is Justice Jackson's concurrence in Youngstown. I brought it because I thought it might come up tonight. Would you like me to read the exact passage that proves your statement wrong?" Before Levin could answer, she began to read aloud. "When the President acts pursuant to an express or implied authorization of Congress, his authority is at its highest, because it includes all that he has on his own plus all that Congress can give him. This executive order was issued under statutory authority, specifically granted by Congress in the 2022 Infrastructure Security Act, Section 42. Levin's expression changed noticeably. His loud confidence began to fade, replaced by the dawning awareness that he might be losing the ground under him. That's just cherry-picking," he muttered, clearly rattled. "You're leaving out the broader context of Jackson's opinion." "I'd be glad to discuss the full context," Crockett replied smoothly, "if you'll let me finish without interrupting. Would you like to try that method, Mr. Levin?" The camera caught Hannity glancing offstage, likely toward a producer. The segment was slipping far away from the usual format, with Levin, the network's main star, clearly on the defensive. "We need to take a quick break," Hannity jumped in. "When we return, more of this spirited debate between Congresswoman Crockett and Mark Levin about the constitutionality of the president's executive order." As the cameras cut to commercials, the studio air remained heavy with tension. Levin shuffled his papers, his normal confidence visibly shaken. Across from him, Crockett calmly looked through her notes, appearing completely unfazed by the clash. What the audience at home didn't see was Levin leaning angrily toward a producer during the break, whispering demands. Crew members later said he insisted that the format be altered, and even argued that Crockett's microphone should be adjusted because she's being too aggressive. When the broadcast resumed, Hannity tried to steer things back into safer territory with an easy question about Levin's new book. It was an obvious attempt to help his friend recover, but Crockett wasn't about to let the legal debate slip away. "Sheen, if I may," she interjected politely but firmly. "People tuned in for a discussion about constitutional oversight, not a book promotion. I'd like to return to Mr. Levin's claims about executive power, if that's all right." Hannity blinked, surprised at the pushback, but nodded. "Of course, Congresswoman, please go ahead." "Thank you," Crockett said, turning back to Levin. "Mr. Levin, you've said on your show many times that this executive order represents, quote, unprecedented overreach that breaks the separation of powers. Yet the Congressional Research Service report, which I'm certain you've seen, concluded that this order is actually narrower than similar actions taken by the prior administration, which you supported on your program. How do you explain that contradiction?" The question was sharp, aimed precisely at exposing inconsistency, and Levin knew it. His reply came fast and predictable. "Another interruption. That's a completely unfair way to frame my position. The situations are not at all the same and—" "Mr. Levin," Crockett cut in, her patience thinning. "That's interruption number 15. But more importantly, you're dodging the issue. The nonpartisan legal experts found your outrage to be selective. You defended broader executive action when it matched your politics, and now you attack a narrower order when it doesn't." The camera caught Levin's jaw tightening as he realized his usual methods weren't effective. Instead of backing down, he pushed harder, raising his voice into the familiar shout his radio audience would recognize. "This is exactly why Congress never gets anything done," he thundered. "Instead of debating substance, you're counting interruptions like some referee. The American people deserve better than this political theater." Crockett's reply was calm but sharp. "The American people deserve a real conversation where both sides are actually heard. That isn't a game, Mr. Levin. It's basic respect for democratic dialogue." The moment had clearly struck a chord with viewers. Social media was already ablaze with clips from the confrontation, hashtags like "Faye let her speak" and "Faye Levin lecture" trending fast. In the control room, producers were signaling Hannity that online engagement was surging. delivering exactly what the network wanted, even if not the way they had planned. Seeing both danger and opportunity, Hannity stepped in again. Let's bring this back to the constitutional question. Congresswoman Crockett, in your legal opinion, where exactly does the Constitution draw the line on executive power in this situation? It was a fair question, and one that let Crockett dig into the law itself. She began outlining the historical understanding of presidential power in matters tied to national security. For half a minute, she spoke clearly and without interruption, laying out a structured argument. But, predictably, Levin couldn't resist. This is constitutional revisionism at its worst, he interrupted. The founders would be horrified by this idea. They specifically designed the system to block this exact. Mr. Levin, Crockett cut in, her voice carrying a sharper edge now. That's interruption number 16. And now you're speaking for the founders, without admitting that respected constitutional scholars on both sides of politics disagree about this very issue. She reached into her folder again and pulled out several pages. In fact, here are direct quotes from conservative scholars, including officials from Republican administrations, who agree that this executive order is constitutional. The camera zoomed closer as she lifted the pages. Professor Michael McConnell of Stanford Law, appointed to the federal bench by President George W. Bush, wrote just last week that this order is well within presidential authority. And former Attorney General Michael Mukasey said that while he may not agree with the policy itself, the constitutional authority behind it is clear. Levin looked caught off guard by those names. His go-to move of dismissing opposing arguments as radical left-wing rhetoric wouldn't work against conservative legal heavyweights of this level. Those quotes are out of context, he stammered, scrambling. And neither McConnell nor Mukasey has the complete information about the order's details. I've provided the full quotes and citations, Crockett replied, sliding the documents forward. Viewers can check them for themselves. But more importantly, Mr. Levin, this shows that serious constitutional experts, even conservatives, can disagree on complex matters. Your habit of declaring any opposing view as garbage or unconstitutional doesn't match the real complexity of constitutional law. The momentum had clearly swung. Levin, once known for his dominating certainty, now looked defensive. His repeated interruptions had turned against him, making him appear overbearing rather than authoritative. Each time he cut Crockett off, she paused for a moment, expecting the interruption that felt almost certain. When it didn't come right away, she went on, furthermore, in the 2020 case of, "This is absurd," Levin burst out, no longer able to hold himself back. "You're completely twisting the meaning of the Youngstown case. Jackson's concurrence doesn't support your argument in the slightest. This is what happens when politicians who never truly studied constitutional law start tossing around Supreme Court cases they don't even understand." The camera shifted to Crockett's face, which showed not anger, not irritation, but something closer to quiet satisfaction, almost as if Levin had walked straight into a trap she had carefully set up. "Mr. Levin," she said in a steady tone, "that's interruption number 14. And what's even more interesting is that you've just proven my point about your debate style. But more importantly, you've also made a big mistake about Justice Jackson's concurrence. I've written entire chapters on the Youngstown case." Levin shot back, his voice rising with frustration. "I don't need a lecture from someone who actually clerked for a federal judge and practiced constitutional law," Crockett interjected, breaking her own no-interruption rule. "Or Mr. Levin, with all due respect to your long radio career, I've actually argued constitutional cases in federal court, and what you just said about Justice Jackson's concurrence is flat-out incorrect." The studio fell silent. Even Hannity seemed uneasy as the camera zoomed in on the standoff. Levin's face shifted, the anger giving way to a less certain expression. "That's the problem with cutting people off all the time, Mr. Levin," Crockett continued, her voice calm yet firm. "You sometimes end up missing information that could have kept you from making mistakes on national television." At that moment, Crockett opened the folder in front of her and pulled out a single sheet. The camera zoomed closer as she raised it. It was a page with highlighted passages. "This is Justice Jackson's concurrence in Youngstown. I brought it because I thought this might come up. Would you like me to read the section that directly contradicts your claim?" Before Levin could react, she started reading aloud. "When the President acts pursuant to an express or implied authorization of Congress, His authority is at its maximum, for it includes all that he possesses in his own right plus all that Congress can delegate. This executive order was issued under statutory authority, specifically given by Congress in the 2022 Infrastructure Security Act, Section 42. Levin's expression shifted again. The bluster that usually carried him was fading, replaced by a slow realization that he might be outmatched. That's a selective reading, he stuttered, clearly unsettled. You're ignoring the larger context of Jackson's analysis. I'd be glad to discuss the full context. Crockett replied smoothly. If you'll let me finish without interrupting. Would you like to try that method, Mr. Levin? The camera caught Hannity glancing off to the side, probably toward a producer. The segment was drifting far from the expected script, with Levin, the network's star, suddenly put on the defensive. We need to take a quick break, Hannity announced. When we come back, more of this lively debate between Congresswoman Crockett and Mark Levin on the constitutionality of the president's executive order. As the cameras cut away, the studio stayed tense. Levin shuffled papers, his usual confidence shaken. Crockett, meanwhile, sat quietly, reviewing her notes, appearing unbothered by the confrontation. What viewers didn't see during the commercial was Levin leaning toward a producer, angrily whispering. Crew members later said he demanded the segment format be changed and insisted Crockett's microphone be adjusted because she's being too aggressive. When the broadcast resumed, Hannity tried to reset the energy by tossing Levin a friendly question about his new book. It was an obvious attempt to help his colleague regain balance, but Crockett wasn't willing to let the debate slide into self-promotion. Shine, if I may, she said politely but firmly. Viewers tuned in for a real discussion about constitutional oversight, not a book ad. I'd like to return to Mr. Levin's claims about executive power, if that's all right. If Hannity seemed briefly caught off guard by her pushback, but nodded. Of course, Congresswoman, go ahead. Thank you, Crockett replied, turning back toward Levin. Mr. Levin, you've repeatedly stated on your program that this executive order is, and I quote, unprecedented overreach that violates separation of powers. But the Congressional Research Service's analysis, which I'm sure you've reviewed, found that this order is actually narrower in scope than similar actions taken by the prior administration, which you defended on your show. How do you explain that contradiction? The question was perfectly targeted, spotlighting the inconsistency, and Levin knew it. His reply came fast, almost reflexive. Another interruption. That's a completely unfair framing of my stance. The situations aren't the same at all or Mr. Levin. Crockett cut in, her patience thinning. That's interruption number 15. More importantly, you're avoiding the question. Non-partisan legal experts have shown your outrage is selective. You supported broader executive action when it fit your politics, but now you condemn a narrower one when it doesn't. The camera caught Levin's face hardening. His usual tactics were failing. Rather than adjusting, he doubled down, raising his voice to the same shouting pitch that his radio audience would instantly recognize. This is why nothing ever gets done in Congress, he thundered. Instead of focusing on substance, you're keeping count of interruptions like some kind of debate referee. The American people deserve more than these childish games. Crockett's reply was calm but piercing. The American people deserve a discussion with substance where both sides can be heard. That isn't a game, Mr. Levin. That's basic respect for democracy. The exchange had clearly struck a chord. Social media was already blowing up with clips of the clash, hashtags like #FireLetterSpeak and #FireLevin lecture trending within minutes. In the control room, producers were signaling Hannity that the debate was drawing massive engagement online, exactly what the network wanted, though perhaps not in the way they expected. Seeing both the risk and opportunity, Hannity tried again to steer things. Let's focus specifically on the constitutional question here. Congresswoman Crockett, in your professional view, where does the Constitution set the limit on executive power in this area? It was a balanced question, inviting real legal discussion. Crockett began to answer, carefully laying out the history of executive authority in national security matters. For nearly half a minute, she spoke without a single interruption, making a strong case. But then, predictably, Levin couldn't resist. This is constitutional revisionism at its absolute worst, he interjected. The founders would be horrified by this interpretation. They built our system to stop exactly this kind of Mr. Levin, Crockett said, her voice carrying a sharper edge now. That's interruption number 16. And you're trying to claim the founders' voices while ignoring that respected constitutional scholars across the political spectrum disagree on this very issue. She reached again into her folder, this time holding up several sheets. In fact, here I have quotes from conservative legal scholars, including officials from Republican administrations, who back the constitutionality of this executive order. The camera zoomed in as she displayed the papers. Professor Michael McConnell of Stanford Law, appointed to the federal bench by President George W. Bush, wrote just last week that this executive order falls well within presidential authority. And former Attorney General Michael Mukasey stated, "While I may disagree with the policy, the constitutional authority is clear." Levin looked genuinely startled at these references. His go-to tactic of dismissing counter-arguments as radical left wouldn't work against conservative authorities of this stature. Those quotes are cherry-picked, he muttered, scrambling, and neither McConnell nor Mukasey has the complete picture of the implementation details. "I've provided the full quotes and citations," Crockett replied, sliding the papers across. "Viewers can check for themselves. But more importantly, Mr. Levin, this proves that respected constitutional experts, even conservatives, can disagree on these complicated matters. The way you declare any opposing view as nonsense or unconstitutional doesn't reflect the nuanced reality of constitutional law." Or the momentum in the room had shifted. Levin, long known for his loud certainty, now looked cornered. His interruptions had backfired, making him appear more like a bully than a knowledgeable voice. Each time he cut off Crockett, she calmly turned it into a point against him, reinforcing her credibility while eroding his.